First contact. Commander Zix'Thor had seen many things in his decades of service to the Galactic Confederation, but nothing could have prepared him for the humans. Standing on the bridge of the assault carrier Unyielding Claw, his antenna twitched with a mixture of anticipation and dread as he watched the latest additions to their joint military operation prepare for deployment. The humans had been part of the Confederation for barely 3 solar cycles, and already they'd managed to turn every established protocol on its head. Their inclusion in this mission to quell the uprising on Nexus 9 was more political than practical, at least, that's what Zix'Thor had initially thought. Status report, he barked, his mandibles clicking in agitation as he observed the pre-deployment preparations through the ship's internal monitoring system. Lieutenant Crayer, his second in command, quickly responded, though her exoskeleton seemed to pale slightly. All systems nominal, Commander. The human contingent is, well, they're engaging in what they call pre-battle rituals. Zix'Thor's compound eyes narrowed. Elaborate. They're consuming large quantities of a stimulant beverage called coffee, sir. And they appear to be laughing about potential death scenarios. Crayer's antennae drooped in confusion. One of them just said, "If I die out there, make sure to delete my browser history," and the others found this highly amusing. Before Zix'Thor could formulate a response, the doors to the bridge hissed open, and Sergeant Sarah "Boom Boom" Rodriguez strode in. The human squad leader moved with a casual confidence that seemed almost offensive in its informality, a steaming mug of the aforementioned stimulant in one hand and an alarming number of explosive devices strapped to her combat vest. "Morning, Commander." Rodriguez called out cheerfully, taking a long sip from her mug. "Beautiful day for some good old-fashioned ass-kicking, don't you think?" Zix'Thor's mandibles twitched in what passed for a Zenui grimace. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I must remind you that this is a serious military operation, not a recreational activity." "Oh, don't worry your pretty little antennae, Commander," Sarah replied with a grin. "We take our fun very seriously." She gestured to her squad, who were visible through the bridge's viewing screens. "See? Private Johnson is so focused he's contemplating the meaning of life while maintaining his equipment." The commander looked over to see the mentioned private sitting cross-legged on the deck, methodically cleaning a wicked-looking combat knife while muttering something about 42, and thanks for all the fish. "Your species' approach to combat operations continues to perplex me," Zix'Thor admitted, his analytical mind struggling to reconcile the humans' apparent frivolity with their impressive combat record. "The reports I've reviewed about your performance in the Arcturus campaign seem almost impossible to believe." Sarah's expression shifted slightly, a knowing look crossing her features. "Ah, you mean the one where we lost half our squad but still managed to hold the line against those cracks and berserkers? Yeah, that was a fun Tuesday." "Fun?" Zix'Thor's antennae stood rigid with shock. "Your unit suffered 50% casualties." "Well, technically it was 47%, Sarah corrected, finishing her coffee. "And everyone made it back eventually. Took Stevens 3 months to grow back his leg in the medpod, but he swears the synthetic one works better anyway." She shrugged. "Besides, you should have seen what we did to the Kraxon." Before Zix'Thor could process this disturbing information, the ship's AI announced their approach to Nexus 9. The planet's surface came into view through the bridge's main viewport, a war-torn landscape of ruined cities and burning refineries. The rebellion had already claimed several major population centers, and the Confederation's patience was wearing thin. "All right, time to earn our pay," Sarah announced, crushing her empty coffee cup and tossing it into a nearby recycling unit. "Permission to brief my team, Commander." Zix'Thor nodded, more out of resignation than actual approval. He watched as Sarah strode out of the bridge, already calling out to her squad over the comm system. "Listen up, you beautiful disasters. Grab your gear and get ready to say hello to our new friends on Nexus 9. And Johnson, if you quote that ancient Earth movie one more time, I'm volunteering you for first contact with the local wildlife." The next hour was a flurry of activity as both Zenui and human forces prepared for deployment. The contrast between the two groups couldn't have been more stark. Zix'Thor's troops moved with precision and discipline, their movements choreographed through centuries of martial tradition. The humans, on the other hand, seemed to operate in a state of controlled chaos, their preparations punctuated by jokes, friendly insults, and what appeared to be impromptu dancing. As they gathered in the deployment bay, Zix'Thor conducted his final inspection. His Zenui Marines stood in perfect formation, their chitin armor gleaming, weapons held at precise angles. The humans, well, they were present, at least. Some were doing last-minute weapons checks, others were adjusting their armor, and Private Johnson appeared to be trying to teach a Zenui warrior something called the Macarena. Sergeant Rodriguez, Zix'Thor called out, trying to maintain his composure, perhaps you could explain your unit's tactical approach to this operation. Sarah was in the middle of checking her rifle's targeting system but looked up with a grin. Simple, Commander. We go in, we find the bad guys, and we introduce them to the concept of human ingenuity. With extreme prejudice. That's not a tactical approach, that's barely even a suggestion, Zix'Thor protested. What about formation? Communications protocols? Rules of engagement? Oh, we've got those too, Sarah assured him, patting her rifle affectionately. Rule 1, don't die. Rule 2, if you're going to die, take as many of them with you as possible. Rule 3, if rules 1 and 2 fail, make sure your death is spectacular enough to make it into the squad's highlight reel. Before Zix'Thor could point out the numerous violations of Confederation military doctrine in those statements, the ship's AI announced their final approach to the landing zone. The assault carrier's engines roared as they breached Nexus 9's atmosphere, the hull creaking under the strain of re-entry. This is it, people. Sarah called out to her squad. Remember, we've got a reputation to uphold. The Zenui think we're crazy. Let's show them they don't know the half of it. As the deployment bay doors began to open, revealing the war-torn landscape of Nexus 9, Zix'Thor made a mental note to update his will. Something told him this mission was going to be unlike anything in his extensive military career. The story continues as our unlikely allies prepare to face their first battle together, each side about to learn valuable lessons about the nature of warfare, survival, and the unbreakable human spirit. Battle rhythm. The first 20 minutes on Nexus 9's surface redefined everything Commander Zix'Thor thought he knew about combat. As the mixed squad pushed through the ruins of what had once been a prosperous mining colony, the differences between Zenui and human combat doctrine became startlingly clear. His Marines moved with practiced precision, securing corridors and intersections with textbook efficiency. The humans, well, they moved like water through broken pipes, unpredictable, unstoppable, and somehow always finding the path of least resistance, even if that path involved going through walls rather than around them. Contact front. Private Johnson's voice crackled over the comm, followed by the distinctive sound of human weapons fire. We've got hostiles in the Commerce District, and they've brought toys. Zix'Thor's antenna twitched at the sound of heavy energy weapons charging up. Sergeant Rodriguez, maintain position until we can establish a proper firing line. Yeah, about that, Sarah's voice cut through his order, accompanied by what sounded suspiciously like someone loading multiple grenade launchers simultaneously. Johnson, you still got that experimental shield generator we borrowed from R&D? You mean the one they said might accidentally create a small singularity if we overcharged it? That's the one. Zix'Thor's mandibles clicked in alarm. Sergeant, the use of untested equipment in combat situations is strictly against. The rest of his sentence was drowned out by an explosion, followed by Sarah's enthusiastic whooping. Through the smoke and debris, he watched in horror as Private Johnson activated the shield generator, creating a dome of crackling energy around himself. The rebel force's energy weapons splashed harmlessly against it, their shots being absorbed and redirected. Oh hell yeah! Johnson shouted. Sarge, this thing doesn't just block energy weapons, it sends them back. We've got ourselves a bounce house. Sarah's laughter echoed through the calm. Perfect. Everyone behind Johnson. We're going bowling for bad guys. Before Zix'Thor could process what was happening, the human squad had formed up behind Johnson's shield, using it as mobile cover as they advanced on the rebel position. The insurgents, clearly not prepared for their own weapons to be used against them, began to fall back in disarray. Zenui squad, supporting positions. Zix'Thor ordered, adapting to the situation with professional flexibility. His Marines quickly took up elevated positions, their precise fire keeping the rebels from flanking the advancing humans. Lieutenant Crayer moved up beside him, her weapon tracking potential threats. "Sir, I've been analyzing the humans' combat patterns, and I can't find any." "That, Lieutenant, appears to be their pattern," Zix'Thor replied dryly. "Though I'm beginning to suspect there's method to their madness." As if to prove his point, Sarah's voice came over the comm again. "Hey Commander, you see that big statue in the center of the Commerce District? The ugly one that looks like a Kraxan tried to mate with a garbage compactor." Zix'Thor's optical sensors located the monument in question, a garish piece of rebel propaganda art. "I see it. What about it?" "Well, our scans show it's hollow, and there's some pretty interesting energy readings coming from inside. Want to bet that's where they're controlling those automated defense turrets from?" "A reasonable assumption," Zix'Thor agreed. "We should establish a perimeter and—" "Or," Sarah interrupted, "we could do this." "Johnson. Time to test that singularity theory." "Wait, what?" Zix'Thor's antenna stood straight up in alarm. "Sergeant, don't you dare." The experimental shield generator made a sound that shouldn't have been possible in normal spacetime, followed by a brilliant flash of light. When Zix'Thor's vision cleared, he saw that the statue, along with a significant portion of the plaza around it, had been transformed into what appeared to be modern art made of twisted metal and stone. Johnson's voice was thoughtful. "Not so much a singularity as a localized gravity wave. Think we can expense this to R&D as a field test." The rebels, apparently deciding that fighting enemies who could casually manipulate gravity wasn't in their best interest, began a rapid withdrawal from the area. Sarah's squad pursued with enthusiasm, though their tactics seemed to consist mainly of finding new and creative ways to use their environment as weapons. "Commander," Crayer's voice held a note of resigned acceptance, "I believe I owe you 20 credits. You said the humans would do something impossible within the first hour of deployment." "I didn't believe you." Zix'Thor would have smiled if his facial structure allowed it. "Keep watching, Lieutenant. I suspect that was just the warm-up." As they secured the Commerce District, Sarah approached the Zenui command position, her armor covered in dust but her eyes bright with excitement. "Good news, Commander. We found their command center. It's underneath the old mining administration building." "Bad news?" "They've got some kind of psychic dampening field up." "That is concerning," Zix'Thor admitted. The Zenui relied heavily on their natural telepathic abilities for coordination in combat. "Without our psychic link, coordinating an assault would be extremely difficult." "Yeah, about that," Sarah grinned, and Zix'Thor felt his cardiac organs sink. He was beginning to recognize that expression. It usually preceded something that would give his mission report writers nervous breakdowns. "We might have a solution. You ever heard of human music?" Before Zix'Thor could respond, a thunderous beat began emanating from the human's combat suit's external speakers. The rhythm was primal, aggressive, and somehow both terrible and inspiring at the same time. "We call this one, Welcome to the Jungle," Sarah shouted over the din, "old Earth classic. If we can't use psychic coordination, we'll use good old-fashioned rock and roll. The beat tells you when to move, the guitar solos are for advancing, and when the chorus hits, that's when we all go crazy together." "This is not standard military doctrine," Zix'Thor protested weakly, even as he found his own antenna beginning to twitch in time with the rhythm. "Nope." Sarah agreed cheerfully. But it works. Watch this, Johnson, hit the chorus. The music suddenly intensified, and the human squad moved as one, their actions synchronized not by military precision but by the primitive power of rhythm. To Zix'Thor's amazement, it worked. Without their psychic coordination, his own Marines found themselves instinctively moving to the beat, their actions falling into sync with the humans. See. Sarah called out as they began their advance on the administration building. Music is the universal language. Well, that and violence, but music sounds better in the mission reports. The next hour was a blur of combat, punctuated by what Sarah called a killer soundtrack. The rebels, already thrown off balance by the unorthodox assault, seemed completely unprepared for the sight of Zenui Marines advancing in time to human battle hymns. I have to admit, Crayer commented as they secured another sector, there is something inspiring about their music. Though I'm not sure I understand all the references. What exactly is a highway to hell? Trust me, Johnson replied, reloading his weapon, if we're doing our job right, the rebels are about to find out. As they approached the administration building's main entrance, Sarah called for a halt. The massive doors were sealed with energy shields, and sensor scans showed multiple defense systems active. All right, time for the finale, she announced, scrolling through her suit's music library. Commander, you might want to brace yourself. This next one's called The Final Countdown, and trust me, it's exactly as dramatic as it sounds. Zix'Thor looked at the fortified entrance, then at his unlikely allies. The humans were grinning with anticipation, their weapons primed. His own Marines, though still maintaining their discipline, had adopted more relaxed stances, some even bobbing their heads slightly to the lingering rhythm of the previous song. Very well, Sergeant, he said, making a decision that would probably give the Zenui High Command collective apoplexy. Show me how humans end a battle. Sarah's grin widened as she queued up the music. Oh, Commander, we're not going to end this battle. She checked her weapons one final time. We're going to make it legendary. Hit it, Johnson. As the first notes of synthesized music filled the air, Zix'Thor realized that his reports about human combat effectiveness had been completely wrong. They weren't effective despite their apparent chaos, they were effective because of it. And as the music built toward its crescendo, he found himself wondering if perhaps the Zenui could learn a thing or two about embracing chaos. The story continues as our unlikely allies prepare to breach the rebel stronghold, their unconventional tactics about to be put to the ultimate test. The breaking point. The administration building's main lobby looked like something out of an ancient Earth gladiatorial arena, if that arena had been designed by a paranoid weapons engineer with unlimited resources and a grudge against intruders. Automated turrets tracked their movement from every angle, energy barriers shimmed between massive columns, and the floor itself seemed to pulse with suspicious technological patterns. Well, Sarah whispered, crouched behind a fallen section of wall, they definitely weren't expecting company for dinner. Commander Zix'Thor's antenna twitched as his compound eyes analyzed the defenses. These security measures appear to be of cracks in design. Highly sophisticated. A direct assault would be suicide. Johnson suggested helpfully, still bobbing his head slightly to the fading echoes of their musical entrance. I was going to say, inadvisable, Zix'Thor corrected, but your assessment is equally accurate. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she studied the layout. The rebels had transformed what was once a symbol of civilian administration into a death trap, but something about the setup nagged at her tactical instincts. Hey Commander, your people are good with energy signatures, right? Does anything about these defenses look off to you? Zix'Thor focused his sensory arrays on the security systems. After a moment, his mandibles clicked in surprise. Indeed. The power distribution is highly inefficient. They're drawing massive amounts of energy, far more than these systems should require. Which means they're either really bad at engineering, or... Sarah's face split into a grin that made several nearby Zenui warriors instinctively take a step back. Or they're powering something else, Lieutenant Crayer finished, her own sensors confirming the analysis. Something big. Johnson, Sarah called out, remember that thing we did on Arcturus Prime? With the power coupling and the emergency lighting system? The private's eyes lit up. The one that got us formally banned from ever touching infrastructure maintenance equipment again. That's the one. Think you can work the same magic here? Johnson studied the exposed power conduits running along the walls, his expression turning thoughtful. Maybe. But we'd need a distraction. Something big enough to keep their attention off the power grid for at least 2 minutes. A distraction? Sarah turned to Zix'Thor, her grin widening. Commander, how do your people feel about improvisational theater? 20 minutes later, Zix'Thor found himself questioning every life choice that had led him to this moment. His Marines, the pride of the Zenui fleet, were arranged in what Sarah had called a flash mob formation in front of the building's main entrance. Their armor had been hastily decorated with scraps of reflective material, and they were attempting to follow the humans' instructions on something called synchronized dancing. Remember, Sarah's voice crackled over the comm, when the music starts, just let it flow through you. Think less, precise military drill, and more, sugar-rushed toddler at a birthday party. I don't understand any of those references, Zix'Thor replied, his dignity hanging by a thread. And I'm not entirely sure this plan isn't just an elaborate form of psychological warfare against your own allies. Sarah's laugh was not reassuring. Trust me, Commander. If there's one thing humans have learned over the centuries, it's that nothing throws people off their game like unexpected musical numbers. Plus, while they're trying to figure out why elite military forces are recreating ancient TikTok dances, Johnson can work his magic on their power grid. And if this doesn't work? Then we die knowing we gave the enemy surveillance team the most confusing footage they'll ever see. Hit it. The opening notes of what Sarah had called "Stayin' Alive" echoed through the plaza. As instructed, the Zenui Marines began their choreographed movements, their naturally rigid exoskeletons adding an unintentionally perfect robotic quality to the dance. Through his tactical display, Zix'Thor could see the rebel security forces' reactions. Confusion turned to disbelief, then to outright bewilderment as elite Zenui warriors performed what humans apparently called the hustle, in perfect synchronization. Energy signatures are shifting, Kreia reported, somehow maintaining her professional tone while executing a surprisingly graceful spin. They're diverting power to external sensors and cameras. They appear to be recording this. Of course they are, Sarah replied with satisfaction. Nobody can resist a viral video in the making. Johnson, how's it going back there? Almost got it, Johnson's voice was strained with concentration. Just need to reverse the polarity of the neutron flow. That's not a real thing, one of the human technicians muttered. Maybe not, Johnson agreed, but it sounds cool, and, got it. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The building's power grid hiccuped, surged, and then began to cascade in exactly the wrong direction. Security barriers flickered and died, automated turrets slumped like deactivated puppets, and the suspicious floor patterns faded to dull metal. Secondary systems activating, a rebel voice announced over external speakers, sounding panicked. Rerouting power to critical functions and, wait, why is the sewage system suddenly drawing maximum power? And why is all the coffee in the break room reheating simultaneously? That would be the chaos protocols kicking in, Johnson announced proudly. Fun fact, modern security systems are really bad at handling it when every single subsystem decides to activate at random intervals. Especially when you convince them that the vending machines are actually critical defense infrastructure. Sarah gave the signal, and the combined human Zenui force surged forward, abandoning their dance routine for a more traditional assault. The rebels, their defenses in shambles and their command center apparently being attacked by their own coffee makers, offered only token resistance. I can't believe that worked, Zix'Thor commented as they secured the main control room. Though I suspect I'll be answering questions about this tactical approach for the rest of my career. Look on the bright side, Sarah offered, checking the fallen rebels for intelligence materials. Your dance moves were actually pretty impressive. Ever thought about posting tutorials? Before Zix'Thor could formulate a response that wouldn't violate several regulations about maintaining military dignity, Johnson's voice cut through the calm with a very different tone than his usual joviality. Sarge? Commander? You're going to want to see this. They found Johnson in what appeared to be a secondary research lab, his usual grin replaced by a grim expression. Holographic displays showed what appeared to be weapon schematics, but it was the biological containment units lining the walls that drew their attention. Are those what I think they are? Sarah asked, her voice unusually quiet. Zix'Thor's antenna drooped in recognition. Neurological rewriting pods. The kind used in forbidden consciousness transfer experiments. But these have been modified. They're not trying to transfer consciousness, Johnson reported, reading through the data files. They're trying to weaponize it. Turn it into some kind of psychic virus. According to these notes, they've already started testing it on civilian populations in the outer colonies. The implications hit them all at once. A weapon that could rewrite neural patterns on a massive scale, turning entire populations into puppet soldiers. It was the kind of weapon that could bring even the mighty Confederation to its knees. This isn't just a rebellion anymore, Sarah said, her usual humor completely gone. This is a potential genocide in the making. How many of these facilities do they have? According to these files, at least 3 more, Kreia reported, her exoskeleton pale with shock. All in heavily populated systems. Zix'Thor's mandibles clicked in determination. Then we need to move quickly. But this level of threat requires a full battle fleet, and the nearest reinforcements are at least 2 days away. 2 days might be too late, Sarah replied, checking the research logs. They're planning to launch their first major test within the next 12 hours. Some place called New Terra Colony. New Terra? Johnson's head snapped up. That's a human settlement. 10 million civilians, mostly families. His hands tightened on his weapon. My sister's family lives there. The room fell silent as the weight of the situation settled over them. They were looking at a threat that could reshape the face of the galaxy, and they were the only ones in position to stop it. Well, Sarah finally said, her voice taking on an edge that made even the Zenui warriors stand straighter, I guess we're about to show these bastards why you don't threaten human colonies. She turned to Zix'Thor. Commander, I know this is way above our pay grade, but we're out of options, Zix'Thor finished. He studied the humans' faces, seeing in them the same determination he felt. Very well. Lieutenant, contact the ship. Have them prepare for immediate dust-off. We have 3 more facilities to visit, and not much time to make our social calls. As they prepared to move out, Sarah paused by one of the containment units, her expression hardening. You know, Commander, humans have a saying, mess with the bull, get the horns. I'm not familiar with this bovine reference, Zix'Thor admitted. Sarah's smile was all edges. It means these rebels are about to learn why the galaxy's most dangerous predators aren't the ones with the biggest teeth or the strongest armor. She checked her weapons with practiced efficiency. They're the ones who look death in the face and decide to punch it for trying to ruin their day. The story continues as our heroes race against time to prevent a catastrophic weapon from being unleashed, their unlikely alliance about to be tested in ways none of them could have imagined. Against all odds. The unyielding claw dropped out of hyperspace above Outpost Station Gamma 7, its hull still bearing scorch marks from their previous engagements. They had already neutralized 2 of the rebel research facilities, but each victory had come at a cost. The ship's medical bay was filled with both Zenui and human warriors, their wounds a testament to the increasingly desperate nature of their mission. Status report, Commander Zix'Thor called out, his antenna still twitching from their last close encounter with rebel forces. Third facility confirmed, Lieutenant Crayer responded, her exoskeleton showing signs of recent repairs. But we've got a problem, sir. They've activated some kind of orbital defense grid. Sarah, who had been studying the tactical display with uncharacteristic seriousness, let out a low whistle. Those aren't just any defense platforms. Those are cracks and siege breakers. Top of the line, designed to take down capital ships. How many? Zix'Thor asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. 12, Johnson replied from his engineering station. Plus what looks like, oh, that's not good. Define not good, Sarah prompted. Remember those psychic amplifiers we found in the research labs? They've got a bigger version. Much bigger. According to these readings, they could probably fry every sentient mind in a 3-system radius. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just racing against time anymore, they were facing enough firepower to vaporize their ship several times over, plus a weapon that could turn populated systems into neural wastelands. Well, Sarah finally said, her usual grin taking on a slightly manic edge, at least they're taking us seriously now. Got any more of that experimental tech lying around, Johnson? About that, Johnson's expression brightened in a way that made several Zenui warriors instinctively reach for their safety harnesses. Remember how we've borrowed those shield generators? I might have done some tinkering. Zix'Thor's antenna twitched. Define tinkering. You know how the original design could redirect energy weapons? Well, I figured, why stop there? With a few modifications, and maybe slightly bending the laws of physics, we might be able to do the same thing with psychic attacks. That's not how psychic energy works, Crayer protested. The neural interfaces alone would need a biological component to process the psychic feedback, Johnson finished. Something with natural psychic abilities and advanced neural processing capabilities. All eyes turned to the Zenui crew members. Their species' natural telepathic abilities had evolved over millennia, their brains capable of processing complex psychic energies that would overwhelm most other species. You want to wire Zenui warriors into experimental human technology, Zix'Thor stated flatly. Technology that, by your own admission, breaks several laws of physics. Pretty much, yeah. Johnson's grin widened. But hey, if it works, we'll have protection against both their conventional weapons and their psychic attacks. If it doesn't, well, we probably won't be around long enough to file the incident report. Sarah turned to Zix'Thor, her expression serious despite her light tone. It's your call, Commander. We're in your space, using your people. If you say no, we'll find another way. Zix'Thor studied the tactical display, his compound eyes taking in the overwhelming odds they faced. By any rational military analysis, their mission was already impossible. But they had already accomplished several impossible things today, largely by throwing rational military analysis out the airlock in favor of human improvisation. How many Zenui volunteers would you need? 3 should do it, Johnson replied. The system needs a triangulated psychic field to, he paused at Sarah's raised eyebrow. I mean, 3 would be good. Yeah. To no one's surprise, Zix'Thor himself volunteered to be one of the 3. Lieutenant Crayer and a warrior named Vextal, who had distinguished himself during their previous engagements, completed the trio. The next hour was a blur of activity as Johnson and his engineering team worked to integrate their Zenui volunteers into the modified shield system. The process involved more duct tape than anyone was comfortable with, and at least one piece of equipment had, prototype, probably won't explode, written on it in marker. I have to ask, Zix'Thor said as Johnson attached the final neural interface, where did you learn to modify advanced technology like this? Oh, you know, Johnson replied vaguely, picked up a few things here and there. Did some light reading. Watched a lot of sci-fi. The usual. He got banned from 3 different engineering schools, Sarah added helpfully. Something about excessive creativity and blatant disregard for the impossible. That last explosion wasn't even my fault, Johnson protested. How was I supposed to know antimatter doesn't like being tickled? Before Zix'Thor could process that concerning statement, the ship's sensors detected movement from the orbital platforms. The rebels had spotted them. Multiple weapon locks, Kreia reported, her voice steady despite the neural interface now wrapped around her antenna. They're charging their main batteries. Johnson, Sarah called out, please tell me your crazy idea is ready. Ready is a strong word, Johnson replied, making one final adjustment. Let's go with probably won't kill us immediately. The first salvo from the siege breakers lit up space like artificial suns, their energy beams powerful enough to cut a capital ship in half. They struck the unyielding claw's modified shields and... Holy shit, it's working! Johnson exclaimed, staring at his readings. The shields are actually absorbing the energy and, wait, what are you three doing? Zix'Thor, Kreia, and Vextal had their eyes closed in concentration, their antenna glowing with an inner light as they processed the incredible energies flowing through the shield system. But they weren't just absorbing the attack, they were reshaping it. Commander? Sarah asked, watching in amazement as the energy beams began to curve and twist in impossible ways. Zenui battle meditation, Zix'Thor explained through gritted mandibles. Traditional technique, adapted for current circumstances. The rebel weapons fire, guided by the combined psychic power of 3 Zenui warriors filtered through experimental human technology, began to loop back on itself. Siege breaker platforms found their own energy beams striking them from impossible angles, their shields useless against weapons they themselves had fired. That's... Johnson checked his readings again. That's not supposed to be possible. The power requirements alone should. Less physics, more shooting, Sarah interrupted, targeting the gaps their improvised defense had created. Let's not give them time to figure out what we're doing. The battle that followed would later be classified as technically impossible by 3 different military review boards. The unyielding claw danced through the debris field of destroyed siege breakers, its shields turning enemy fire back on itself while its own weapons found weak points that shouldn't have existed. But even as they cleared the orbital defenses, a new threat emerged. The massive psychic amplifier on the station began to power up, its energy readings going off the charts. They're going to trigger it early, Kreia reported, her voice strained from the neural interface. Better to destroy local systems than risk losing the technology. How long until it reaches full power? Sarah asked. 3 minutes. Maybe less. That's not enough time to get within conventional weapon range, Johnson said, his fingers flying over his console. And if we try to push these shields any harder? He didn't need to finish the sentence. The 3 Zenui warriors were already showing signs of strain, their exoskeletons pale from the effort of channeling so much energy. Perhaps, Zix'Thor said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of command even through his exhaustion, it is time for another impossible thing. Sarah's eyes lit up with recognition. You thinking what I'm thinking, Commander? If you are thinking we should take a page from your species book and, as you say, go crazy, Zix'Thor replied, then yes. Johnson, Sarah called out, remember that thing you said would definitely kill us if we tried it? The thing with the shield harmonics and the power core. The one that would basically turn our ship into a giant psychic conductor. That's the one. Johnson's grin returned, matching Sarah's for pure maniacal glee. Give me 30 seconds. And, if anyone has any unfinished business or browser histories they need to delete, now would be the time. As Johnson worked, Sarah turned to the bridge crew. Alright people, this is going to get weird. And probably violent. Possibly explosive. But definitely weird. You know, Kreia commented through the neural interface, I'm starting to understand why your species has so many safety warnings on everything. The story continues as our heroes prepare to attempt their most desperate gambit yet, pushing the boundaries of both technology and sanity in their race to prevent catastrophe. Legends never die. The bridge of the unyielding claw was eerily silent as they approached the rebel flagship. Through the view screen, the massive vessel hung against the backdrop of New Terra like a predator poised to strike. Its experimental psychic amplifiers were already powering up, ready to broadcast the neural rewriting signal across the entire colony. Commander Zix'Thor stood at his command station, his antenna still bearing the scorch marks from their last desperate battle. Around him, both Zenui and human crew members worked with quiet efficiency, the distinctions between their species forgotten in the face of what was at stake. "Status report," he called out, his voice carrying the weight of too many close calls and not enough time. "The good news is we made it here before they could activate the weapon," Sarah responded from her tactical station. The human sergeant looked as battered as the rest of them, but her eyes still held that dangerous gleam. "The bad news is they've got enough firepower to turn us into cosmic dust the moment we get within range." "And our countermeasure?" Johnson looked up from his engineering console, where he'd been working non-stop since their discovery in the research facility. "The anti-psychic barrier is ready, but we've only got enough power to protect either the ship or the colony. Not both." The implications hung heavy in the air. They could save themselves or save 10 million civilians, but not both. The math was simple. The choice was impossible. "Well," Sarah said, breaking the silence with a grim smile, "I always wanted to go out in a blaze of glory. Didn't expect it to be quite so literal, though." Zix'Thor's mandibles clicked in disagreement. "There must be another way. The Zenui do not abandon their allies." "With all due respect, Commander," Krayer interjected, her exoskeleton pale but determined, "we're well past standard protocols. The rebels will detect us any moment, and when they do." The ship's sensors screamed in warning as the rebel flagship's weapon systems locked onto them. On the view screen, energy began to coalesce around its main gun ports. "They're powering up their main batteries," Johnson reported, his fingers flying over his console. "And, wait. Wait a second." His eyes widened. "Commander, Sarge, remember how their power distribution was always weird? Always drawing more energy than they should need?" Sarah's head snapped up. "You thinking what I'm thinking? If you're thinking their power grid has the same vulnerability as their ground facilities." Johnson's grin was back, that familiar mix of brilliance and insanity that had gotten them this far. "Lieutenant," Zix'Thor called out, his tactical mind already racing ahead, "can you confirm their power signature?" Krayer's antenna twitched as she analyzed the data. "It's the same basic architecture, Commander. They scaled it up for the flagship, but the fundamental design hasn't changed." "Then we have our opening." Sarah was already moving, heading for the weapons station. "Johnson, you still got that Chaos Protocol program?" "Loaded and ready to rock, Sarge. But we'll need to get much closer to transmit it." "Like, inside their shields closer." Zix'Thor's compound eyes studied the tactical display, calculating angles and trajectories. "Their shields are strongest at standard attack vectors. But if we came in from beneath? Through the colony's orbital debris field?" Sarah's grin matched Johnson's now. "That's crazy enough to work. But we'll need a distraction. Something big enough to keep their attention topside while we sneak in below." "I believe," Zix'Thor said, his mandibles curving in what his crew recognized as his version of a smile, "this is where your human music might prove useful again." The next few minutes were a blur of activity as they prepared for what Sarah had dubbed Operation Party Crash. The ship's external speakers were modified to broadcast at maximum power, while Johnson's Chaos program was loaded into their main communication array. "You know," Sarah commented as they took their positions, "if we survive this, the mission report is going to be interesting. Dear High Command, we defeated an enemy flagship by giving it the electronic equivalent of a sugar rush while blasting ancient Earth music at it." "If we survive," Zix'Thor replied dryly, "I suspect the High Command will be too relieved to question our methods." The rebel flagship loomed larger in their view screen as they began their approach. Above them, the massive vessel's weapons tracked their expected course, the course any sane military vessel would take. "Ready on your mark, Commander," Sarah called out, her hand hovering over the weapon's controls. "Though I still can't believe we're actually doing this." "In my experience, Sergeant," Zix'Thor responded, "the best human plans are the ones that sound completely impossible until they work." His antenna straightened with determination. "Begin Operation Party Crash." The space around the unyielding claw erupted with sound as they broadcast their chosen song, Final Countdown, once again, because as Sarah had insisted, you can't beat the classics. The rebel flagship's sensors immediately focused on them, its weapons adjusting to target the apparent threat. "They're taking the bait," Kreia reported. "Energy signatures show they're diverting power to forward shields and weapons." "Perfect." Zix'Thor's voice was calm despite the energy bolts now streaking past their hull. "Initiate attack pattern Delta 7. The unyielding claw dove, its engines screaming as they pushed the ship into a maneuver that violated several laws of physics and common sense. They plunged into the orbital debris field, using the fragments of destroyed satellites and stations as cover. "Multiple impacts on outer hull," Johnson called out, somehow managing to sound excited rather than terrified. "Shield integrity at 60% and falling. But hey, at least we're not dead yet." "Target their ventral power distribution node," Zix'Thor ordered as they emerged from the debris field directly beneath the rebel flagship. "Transmit the Chaos Protocol on my mark." Time seemed to slow as they closed the final distance. The rebel flagship, finally realizing their true intention, began to turn its massive bulk to bring its weapons to bear. But they were too close, too fast, too impossible to stop. Now. The Chaos Protocol shot from the unyielding claws communication array, riding the carrier wave of their musical broadcast straight into the rebel flagship's power grid. For a moment, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. The massive vessel's systems went haywire. Weapons fired randomly into space, shield generators cycled on and off, and if their sensors were correct, every single coffee maker and vending machine aboard suddenly activated at maximum power. "Direct hit." Johnson shouted triumphantly. "Their power grid is going into cascade failure. The psychic weapon is offline." But victory came with a price. The rebel flagship, its systems in chaos, began to break apart. Massive chunks of hull plating tore free, creating a deadly field of debris that threatened both ships. "We need to get clear," Kreia warned, her sensors showing the mounting danger. The debris field. A piece of the rebel flagship's hull slammed into the unyielding claw's engine section, sending them into an uncontrolled spin. Warning klaxons blared as systems failed across the ship. "Main power is down," Johnson reported, his earlier excitement replaced by professional focus. "Switching to auxiliaries." "But we're dead in space, Commander." Zix'Thor watched as the rebel flagship continued to tear itself apart, its death throes threatening to take them with it. They had succeeded in their mission, the weapon was destroyed, the colony was safe, but the cost might be higher than they'd anticipated. "Well," Sarah said, looking at the destruction around them, "at least we gave them one hell of a show." "Indeed." Zix'Thor's antenna drooped slightly. "It has been an honor serving with you all." "Oh no," Sarah interrupted, standing up from her station. "We're not doing the noble sacrifice speech thing. Johnson, remember that experimental emergency jump drive you were tinkering with? The one that might technically violate several laws of physics?" "Yeah, but it's completely untested. We'd have better odds playing hopscotch in a minefield." "Perfect. Fire it up." Zix'Thor's compound eyes widened. "Sergeant, the energy requirements alone would be met by rerouting power from life support," Johnson finished, already making the calculations. "We'd have about 30 seconds of air left after the jump, but that's 29 seconds more than we need." Sarah turned to Zix'Thor. "What do you say, Commander?" One last impossible thing before breakfast. Looking at their faces, human and Zenui alike, Zix'Thor saw not resignation but determination. Not fear but resolve. And perhaps most importantly, that uniquely human blend of hope and insanity that had gotten them this far. "Very well," he said, making his final command decision. "Mr. Johnson, activate the emergency jump drive. Let's show the universe why they call us the Impossible Squad." The unyielding claw vanished in a flash of impossible light, leaving behind a legend that would be told in both human and Zenui space for generations to come. A story of two very different species who discovered that the greatest strength comes not from perfect order or pure chaos, but from learning to embrace both. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, in bars and cafes and military academies, people would tell the tale of how a mixed crew of humans and Zenui saved 10 million lives by weaponizing bad power management and good music. Some would say it was impossible. Others would just smile and remember that impossible was just another word for, hasn't met humans yet. As for Commander Zix'Thor and Sergeant Rodriguez? Well, that's another story. But legend has it that somewhere out there, a Zenui commander still twitches his antenna in time to ancient earth music, while a human sergeant teaches young warriors that the best battle plans are the ones that make the enemy stop and say, they can't possibly be that crazy. After all, in a universe full of impossible things, sometimes the most impossible thing of all is knowing when to stop fighting alone and start dancing together. The end.